I took no offense.
Okay, thank you. Today's broadcast is being sponsored by Rab David Dayan because today is his grandfather's boy, on your side, Rabbi Yosef Amram ben Rabbi Avram Shloimeh. His neshama should have Zechariah Levracha. His neshama should have an aliyah, and he was a fourth generation butcher from Tangiers, Morocco, and he lived in Gibraltar. So his neshama should have an aliyah. Rabbi Yosef Amram ben Rabbi Avram Shloimeh. Zechariah Levracha. Okay, so let's see the Mishnah. I believe we're up to the Mishnah on Daf Ayin Aleph, Amud Aleph. So we get to start with a clean break. Balabayis, Shahaya Shituf l'Shchenov. So you had a Balabayis, and he was sharing a chotzer. His home was in the chotzer with two other people. So let's call them Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Shimon was in a chotzer together with Reuven and Levi. And he happened to have had a business agreement with each of his neighbors. Lezeh b'yayin v'lezeh b'yayin. I had a barrel of wine that I shared. Shimon had a bottle of wine or a barrel of wine that he shared with Reuven, and he had a barrel of wine that he shared with Levi. So Zok the Mishnah ain't shrichen Eruv. They don't have to make an Eruv because their Eruv is sort of built in. They already are sharing in food together. So therefore, they don't have to make a new Eruv. What if it was lozeh b'yayin for lozeh b'shemen? Now Rashi tells us, and we're going to see from the Gemara soon, that lozeh b'yayin v'lozeh b'yayin meant that all of the wine that we shared was in one barrel. So we really had one barrel with some wine that belonged to Reuven, some wine that belonged to Shimon, and some wine that belonged to Levi. So that acts as an Eruv. But if it was one with wine and one with oil, so clearly they were in two separate barrels, so it's two separate Eruvin, then Shrichen Eruv, that wouldn't work because the whole purpose of an Eruv Chatzeres is to keep everybody, all three people together. And we don't have that here. Rab Shimon says, Echad zeh v'echad zeh ain't Shrichen Eruv. So the pshat is, even if there's one barrel that I share with Reuven that has oil, and even though there's a second barrel that I share with Levi that has wine, that would also work, and we wouldn't need an Eruv. And we're going to have to understand the logic behind that, because we don't have one food product that's combining everybody together. Rav, the first thing Rav teaches us is that even if it works, lozeh b'yayin v'lozeh b'yayin, that's only uva kli echad. That's only if they're all sharing everything in one barrel, because then they, in effect, have the same thing that they would have if they made an Eruv Chatzeres. Rava, Dekanami. It's muduyak in the Mishnah that the real point is whether or not everything's in one barrel or not. The Katani we learned, lozeh b'yayin v'lozeh b'shemen. If the Mishnah says if he had a partnership with one person with wine and one with oil, shrichen Eruv, there they need an Eruv, that doesn't count as the Eruv. Yamut b'shlomo reisha b'chli echad b'seifa b'shnei kelim. If you're going to learn that the case of yayin b'yayin was when it was all in one barrel, and the case of yayin and shemen is when it is in two separate kelim, shaper, then it makes sense why one is a good Eruv and one isn't. Ali amrit reisha b'shnei kelim useifa b'shnei kelim. If you're going to say even the case of the shutfus of wine, there were two separate barrels, one where Shimon shared with Reuven, and the other where Shimon shared with Levi, well then mali yayin v'yayin, mali yayin v'shemen. Either way, we don't have one barrel that everybody is a shutuf in. So therefore, it's mustaber to say that really the point over here is whether or not all three wines are together or not. Amalei Abai, you don't have a raya. Because maybe if it's wine and wine, it doesn't have to be in the same barrel. Because yayin v'yayin royu la'arv, they could be mixed together. So since they could be mixed together, we could perceive them as if they're together and say that it's a good Eruv. But yayin v'shemen and royu la'arv, you can't put wine and the oil into the same barrel, and therefore, there it wouldn't be a good Eruv. So Abai says you don't have a raya that the point is whether it's one barrel or two barrels. It's possible by wine, even if it's in separate barrels, it would be considered a good Eruv. Because water would dilute into the wine. I believe so. Well, the reason why water doesn't work is because you can't use water for Eruvin. But if there was some other type of juice that would mix with wine, ein chanami. And we're soon going to see that there's going to be a version of how to understand our Mishnah that even oil and wine together would be considered one barrel. So your point is exactly exactly correct. Rab Shimon Omer, echad zeh ve'echad zeh ein tzrichin la'arav. Fragt the Gemara, how could we understand the Shituf of Rab Shimon? Afilu l'zeh b'yayin v'l'zeh b'shemen. There's two separate things happening here. How is that ma'arav everybody together? Omer Rabba zokt Rabba, hacha b'mayaskinen b'chator shebein shnei mevuyos. Rab Shimon is talking about a completely separate shiloh. It's no longer three people in one chotzer that need one Eruv, because they can't have one Eruv. In one place we're shituf with oil, and in another place we're shituf with wine. Rather, we're talking about two separate Eruvin, which means you have a chotzer that has access to a movoy on the left and a movoy on the right. So it has to make shituf mevuyos with its neighboring chotzer to the left, and it has to make shituf mevuyos with its neighboring chotzer to the right. And Rab Shimon holds the case that Rab Shimon is talking about is he used oil to make shituf mevuyos with his neighbor on the left, and this chotzer used wine to make shituf mevuyos with its neighbor on the right. And they're two separate Eruvin. Well, what's the chiddush of two separate Eruvin? Why shouldn't it work? The teretz is because of Rab Shimon l'tamei. We had this Mishnah a while ago. That non Amar Rab Shimon l'ma davar doima. The Mishnah there was talking about someone who was kodesh, three people that were kodesh shvisa, a couple of amos apart from each other. So we said each of the outer guys can spend Shabbos with the guy in the middle because their circles overlap, but the guy on the right and the guy on the left are too far apart, they cannot dine together. And the Mishnah says, Lamad David Daima, what is it similar to? L'shalosh chaseres apsuchos zulazu, upsuchos l'shus harapim. There are three chaseres, chaser A, chaser B, and chaser C. They each had a direct gate to Rishus Harabim, so they don't have to join forces. But they also have gates that allow you to go from one chaser directly to the next. So therefore, they have the option of making an Eruv together as well. And what they did is Irvu Shtay Machitzonis Im Hamtzois. So chaser B made an Eruv with A, and chaser B made an Eruv with C. So the halach is He Mutar Shemen, the He Mutar Sima. Anybody from chaser B can carry in and out of chaser A. Anyone from chaser A can carry in and out of chaser B, and the same thing with C. But A and C, AOC is osur. A and C would not be able to carry with each other because they weren't married with each other. Shkoich for the smile to be. I said AOC is osur. A and C would not be allowed. Zok the Gemara. So this is very similar to that. So what Shimon is saying here is, I made this chotzer made a Eruv, a shituf mevuyos with its neighbor to the left with oil. It made a shituf mevuyos with its neighbor to the right with wine. And it has this exact halacha that A can play with B, B can play with C, but A cannot play with C. The shaila here is what the chiddush is you might think, since we're afraid, since A is playing with B and C is playing with B, A and C might carry from one to the other. Kamash Malan, that you don't make such a gzeira. The Rabbanan would make a gzeira and say we don't allow it. Rab Shimon knows you do not make such a gzeira. Amalei Abaye. So Abaye asked. This is a very difficult comparison to make. Midomi Hosom Katani, in the Mishnah that we just quoted from, it says Shtay Machitzonos Asuris. A and C are also with one another. Hacha, in our Mishnah, it says Ein Shrichen La'arav Klal, which would indicate that A and C could carry together, and that's not true. The way we're explaining the Mishnah now, so Gemara, no, you don't understand the Mishnah right. Ma Ein Shrichen La'arav, it means Shchedim B'Hadei Balabayis. It means the direct neighbors. A doesn't have to make an Eruv with B, and C doesn't have to make an Eruv with B. Abel Shchenim B'Hadei Adodi. But if A wants to carry it to C and vice versa, Shrichen La'arav. So it's exactly the same thing. So our Mishnah doesn't really mean to say they don't need an Eruv at all from A to C. It just means from B to either two does not need an Eruv. So it works out perfectly with Reb Shimon. So it's not a shaila anymore of Eruv Chetzeres, it's a shaila of Shituf Mavuyos. And there's two separate Eruvin The Eruv to the left was done with oil, and the Eruv to the right was done with wine, and there's no reason why you can't do that. Zog to Gemara weiter. Rabbi Yosef Amar, Rabbi Yosef wants to offer a completely different explanation between the Machlokes of Shimon and the Rabbanan. What did we start with? We started with, if we were speaking about the case of Eruv and Chetzeres, so you have Reuben, Shimon, and Levi, each live in a chutzner. How could you have an Eruv with Shimon and Levi with wine, and Shimon and Reuben with oil? Everybody has to be together. It's a chutzner. So Rabbi Yosef Amar, he has another explanation. Is Taka speaking with Eruv and Chetzeres? How can you do it? The teretz is the wine and the oil were in one barrel, which is touching on what Chaim Tzvi mentioned earlier. Rabbi Yosef Amar, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Plukta, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Rabbi Kamil. There's a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and the Rabbanan if you have oil and wine in one barrel, if they're considered together.
Who puts oil and wine in one barrel? That's not mistaber.
There's a lot of cases in the Mishnah that aren't in the Gemara and Mishnah that aren't mistaber. But the thing is, but here it could be mistaber. If you don't have two barrels and you need to store wine and oil, it's really not a problem because they won't mix. If anything, wine and orange juice I wouldn't want to put together in a barrel. And Chaim Tzvi is saying, and you could have two spigots. You could have one at the top, one at the bottom. So one would only pull the oil out, and one will pull the wine out, and they won't mix. So it actually works pretty good. I actually do it often with my Hanukkah neirs. I put the water and oil, and they don't mix. Yeah.
But you don't ruin the water. It doesn't matter if you ruin the water, but it does matter if you ruin the wine or the oil.
Why will it ruin the wine if they stay separated?
Because you lose some in the mix. Yeah.
I guess you only do that if you don't really have another option. So here we had a case. Titnan, Shemen Shetzaf Al Gabe Yayin. You had oil that was put on in a barrel on top of wine. Now the halacha is a tful yoim could passel truma. So if a tful yoim touches truma, that truma is no longer able to be eaten. But that truma, if it touches another piece of truma, it has no impact at all. So tful yoim is at such a low level of truma, it's only with the Rabbanan, that if he touches an item, that item, if it's truma, can no longer be eaten. But if that item went and touched a third item, the third item is scotch-free. So here you have a beautiful case. You have a barrel that has oil sitting on top of wine. The nugget tful yoim b'shemen, and the tful yoim touched the shemen. Do we look at it like the shemen and the yayin in the barrel is one liquid, and then everything becomes puzzle? Or do you look at it like they're two separate things? So the halacha is that Tanakama says, Loi pasal al shemen bilvad. I touched the oil, even though the oil is in the same barrel as the wine, it's completely distinct and separate, and therefore I touched the oil, I didn't touch the wine. So I could siphon off the oil, and the wine below it, I could still use. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Amar, Shneien chiburin zeh lo zeh. The wine and the oil are considered like they're together. And therefore, when the tful yoim touched the oil, automatically we say that he touched the wine. So, Zok Rabbi Yosef, Rabbanan Krabbanan, the Rabbanan who hold that you cannot have one Eruv that has oil together with Reuven and wine together with Levi, that won't work. Because he holds like the Rabbanan that even though they're in the same barrel, it's perceived as if they're in two separate barrels. Because putting them in the same barrel doesn't put them in the same boat. They might be in the same barrel, but they're not in the same boat. However, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri that since they're in the same barrel, they're considered in the same boat, and it's like the shutfis is in one barrel, all three residents of the chutzner. So it has nothing to do with the shaila of Shituf and Mubayis.
One thing is interesting is that even though wine and oil don't mix, you could mix them and then they'll separate.
That's right.
So maybe that's what
so they're even more distinct.
You shake the barrel or something like they could mix and then they'll separate.
So I think what Chaim Tzvi is saying is that if it's a liquid that's separate, that might still be considered one. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri only considers the two if it's the type of liquid that even if you try to actively mix them, they'll still separate. No?
What I'm saying is that when they're in two barrels, you can never mix them.
Right.
But when they're in one barrel, even though wine and oil don't mix,
they could be mixed.
They could be mixed.
Oh, so that's why the Chachamim hold that they're one.
Right, that they
That's why Bich Manur hold they're one, because they could be mixed. If you shook them, they would mix, at least for a little while.
Yeah, like you could put
Uh-huh.
in your
It's-
containers, you could put in.
Well, it's like a salad dressing. You mix oil and vinegar together. If you stir it, then it becomes a dressing. Otherwise, they would separate.
I'm not saying that they'll eventually ever mix,
Uh-huh.
but you can put in your Hanukkah containers, you could put in your oil first, and then you could put in water, right? And then the oil will run to the top.
That's correct.
Meaning that they will
Ah.
do that.
Okay. So that's why they're considered one. Now we have a whole new twist on things. So we had two shittas in our Mishnah. We had the shita of the Rabbanim, who holds wine and wine will be a good Eruv. So if I have a shutfus of wine with Eruvin and I have a shutfus of wine with Levi, we're all one big happy family, and there's a good Eruv for Chetzeres. And then we had the shita of Reb Shimon that even wine and oil. Now we have a shita on the other end of the spectrum. Tanya Reb Elazar ben Tadai Omer echad zeh v'yechad zeh tzricha ma'ariv. Even if we're sharing in wine, we still need a separate Eruv. So we need to get an understanding as to why Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai would hold that way. Because if we have one barrel and we each have some wine in it, why in the world shouldn't that be a good Eruv? So Amar Rabbah, you're right about that. If they have a barrel and Reuven comes with his wine and he dumps it into the barrel, and Shimon comes and dumps some into the barrel, and then Levi comes with his wine and dumps it into the barrel, that's for sure an Eruv. That's exactly what an Eruv is when three people combine their food item together, that joins them all. So where would Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai say it wouldn't work is if they have a financial interest in the barrel. Keep ligi going the chavis of wine cost at $30. Each person put $10 into the pot, and they purchased together a barrel of wine. Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai Sover ein breira. Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai holds ein breira, and Rashi and Tosfos both say that this doesn't mean the classic breira. It just means since we only have a financial interest in it, we didn't actually each contribute food. That's not good enough for Eruv. Again, it's Hilchos Eruvin, it's not Hilchos Choshen Mishpat. When the Rabbanan stel the vek, how an Eruv Chetzeres should be made, it's when we all put our food into one place. But putting our money together and purchasing it doesn't qualify. Rabbanan Sover Yesh Breira, and the Rabbanan says it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we each have some financial interest in this wine. It's good enough to join us together. So it's not the word breira. It doesn't mean breira like it classically means. If we let's look at Tosfos or Elazar ben Tadai Omer ein breira, ein zek ein breiris to bechol duchta kid the Pirish Bekudras. Just I agree with Rashi's of Tosfos that this is not the word breira that we're used to using when we're retroactively determining what something was. The havalahu ki'ilu nishtatvu b'moyesh shloi huber yayin l'kolech levechot. We look at it since no one had a defined portion of wine there, rather each one just put money in, that doesn't give us enough clarity to make an Eruv Chetzeres, because an Eruv Chetzeres it has to be clear that we each contributed a defined piece of food, a defined food item. And that you don't have here because it's very much blended, and it doesn't meet the requirements of what an Eruv Chetzeres requires. So the word breira, how does it touch the word breira? So the way we're touching the word breira, as Rashi is, it's not clear which wine specifically belongs to Reuven, which wine specifically belongs to Shimon, and which wine specifically belongs to Levi. Rather, they all have a financial interest in all of the wine together. Here's where it's going to start to get a little bit complicated. Rabbi Yosef's understanding of Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai takes us into a whole new sugya. Only find out what? Oh, you mean until now it didn't get complicated? No, I meant for today. Now is where it gets complicated. So Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai, Rabbi Yosef Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai Rabban b'soymchin al Shituf v'makam erev kamifli. Now this takes us to a new shayla. So let's talk about it. We have three chetzeres. Let's call them Chetzer A, Chetzer B, and Chetzer C. So we need to accomplish a lot of things here. The first thing that you need to accomplish, if all of the batim in Chetzer A want to be able to carry only in Chetzer A, they need to make an Eruv Chetzeres. The same for B and the same for C, right? Then, if there's a doorway that joins A directly to B and B directly to C, then they also might want to be able to carry in all three chetzeres. A, B, and C might all want to carry in all three chetzeres. So they might want to make a big area of chetzeres to join all three chetzeres together. And then in addition to that, all the members of these three chetzeres want to walk on the main street, which means they're sharing that main street with other chetzeres on the other side of the mobi, and therefore they would need a shituf mavuyos to join the whole neighborhood together, right? There's three separate things here. So the question here is, and we discussed it, if I made a shituf mavuyos, it means we joined all the neighborhoods together, do I now have to go make an Eruv chetzeres? Or once I made an Eruv shituf mavuyos, we're all together. We said shalot tishtakach, right? And that's the maskana of this sugya, that even though we make shituf mavuyos, you still need Eruv chetzeres. Shalot tishtakach. We shouldn't forget about Eruv chetzeres. But a maskana that we learned yesterday could now become a hafamina, and we could chew it through again, which is what we're going to do today. We're going to chew it through.
I noticed something else. I noticed that I was going to ask you that Shituf that we had the according between the Eruvin and the Nuri, that if it's going to be in one barrel, it would be fine. What about the idea? What about the concept of forgetting to have to do this?
Because we have something together. So it's not like there's nothing here. There's something happening here.
They don't have to do anything. That's just a business transaction.
But since there is something with them, people won't forget because people will know that there was a business transaction. It's not as distinct as making an Eruv with a bracha, because you make a bracha when you make an Eruv. It's not as distinct. But I guess Chazal decides where to draw the line. So Zok the head of Gemara Viter. So the shaila here is b'soimchen al shituf b'mokum Eruv kamifli. Could you rely on shituf so that you shouldn't have to make an Eruv chetzeres? The Mar Sover ain't soimchen, Umar Sover soimchen. And Rashi explains as follows. Rashi explains as follows. What happens if the residents of Chatzar A made their own Eruv? So all the people of A can carry an A. B made an Eruv and C made an Eruv, but they didn't make an Eruv with each other. So right now, the resident of A cannot carry in B, and vice versa, right? And then A, B, and C made a shituf mavuyos with 10 other chetzeres. There, everybody agrees that the people from A can carry into B and can carry into C, even though they didn't make their own mini Eruv chetzeres to join A, B, and C. As long as there was an Eruv chetzeres, then the shituf mavuyos will solve all the other problems. But you need to have both. That's what the Mandamer holds, even Ein Tzomchen. The Mandamer holds Tzomchen holds all you need is shituf mavuyos, and you wouldn't need anything else. Now, there's another point we need to bring up, and that is Eruv chetzeres has to be done b'dafka with a food item, because what we're really doing is we're joining our residences. The way to join a residence is with a food item such as pas. It has to be pas. Wine would not be able to be used to make an Eruv chetzeres. It has to be pas. Shituf mavuyos you could even make with wine. Sure, you can make it with pas. Pas is even better. But Eruv chetzeres can only be done with bread. Shituf mavuyos can be done with wine. Also, if we just said before that through the shituf, it counts. Shituf mavuyos, that's right. So shituf is the word that's used. They're essentially the same action. But when you're talking about joining neighborhoods together, we use the word shituf mavuyos. When we're talking about in a more of a localized area, we call it Eruv chetzeres. So for Eruv chetzeres, you have to use pas. For shituf mavuyos, you're even allowed to use yayin. And that's going to come into play as well. Because when we're talking about the shituf that you did for the whole area also being effective for the chatzar, well, shouldn't it depend on what you used for the shituf? Right? If I used for the shituf wine, which I couldn't have used for Eruv chetzeres, maybe then the shituf won't work. And that's also going to be one of the shittas. So at the end of the day, the three shittas that we're going to be encountering now are A, once you make an Eruv shituf mavuyos, even if you made it with wine, it will work, because we say since it's doing its job for shituf, it'll include. But you can't use wine directly for Eruv chetzeres. But if you use it for shituf, we'll say it also joins the chetzeres together. That's one shitta. The other shitta is you could rely on the shituf for Eruv chetzeres, but only if you use bread to do the shituf. And the third shitta is Reb Meir, who we're going to see shortly, who holds even if I use bread for shituf and mavuyos, I still have to make a separate Eruv Chatzeres. As Mechi said, Shaloi Tishtakach, so we shouldn't forget. So those are the three Shittus that we're going to be learning about right now, and we'll see how all the chips fall between Rabbi Elazar ben Tadoi and Reb Meir and the Chachamim. But those are the three Shittus.
The Rav actually said with Shabbos that you can make kiddush on bread. But you can't make kiddush on bread Shabbos morning.
Right.
That's not the reason why he said that was one way how bread was inferior. It was
inferior to wine. Look how the kiddush is inferior. Here, bread is superior, because the point is to join together as one happy family. And you do that with pas. I guess not. No, wine doesn't do that. Rashi says it's only pas. Rashi says it's only pas. If you want to learn that excerpt, we'll learn that excerpt. If you look at Rashi, the Imratul Arv, it's like 10 lines down in the wide lines. Rashi is the Eruv Mishum Dirahu. Eruv Chatzeres means we're going to be living together. The Arv Diras and Lasais Nachas, to make it like we all live together. The Damar Perk Mishotzihu. A person lives where his bread is, not where his wine is. That's right. You make me sound like they're mutually exclusive. Chaim Tzvi just said that the idea of a Nair is not to make them happy, just to make them into a family. They don't have to be happy. Wine would make them happy. So let's see what it says over here. So what Rabbi Yosy wants to suggest, that the machlokes between Rabbi Elazar ben Tadoi and the rest of the Tanoim in our Mishnah is b'soymchem al Shituf v'makom erev kamepuri. The Marsaver ain't soymchem, u'Marsaver soymchem. So to get clarity, our Mishnah is discussing wine. It's not discussing pas. So in our Mishnah, we would say that the Rabbanan hold, since the wine is effective for making shitufei mevuyos, it'll also work that they don't need to make erev chatzeres. That's what the Rabbanan will hold. Rabbi Elazar ben Tadoi holds, you used wine. Wine is not effective for erev chatzeres. So therefore, you need to make another erev. The wine that you use will work fine for the shitufei mevuyos, but you still need to make an erev chatzeres. So basically, we're totally changing the shaila. The shaila has nothing to do with how we discussed what was the machlokes between Reb Shimon and the Chachamim in our Mishnah, which we had two pshatim. Now we're going into a whole new shaila. Everybody in our Mishnah seems to hold that if you used wine for shitufim mevuyos, you don't have to make a separate erev chatzeres. And Rabbi Elazar ben Tadoi holds, if you use the wine for the shitufim mevuyos, you will have to make a separate erev chatzeres. But had you used pas, which is not the case of our Mishnah, had you used pas, then the shitufim mevuyos might have been good even to cover for the erev chatzeres. Yeah, shitufim mevuyos you could use pas. The halacha is you could also use wine. Amar Rabbi Yosef, where did I get this machlokes about being able to rely on the shituf for the erev chatzeres? The Amar Eruvin Amar Rav. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav. So Rav said halacha kreb meir. Amar Rabuna Amar Rav, and Rav also said halacha kreb Elazar ben Tadoi. My time, la mishum dechat taimu. You see, Rav paskent like Reb Meir, who hold you cannot make erev the shitufim mevuyos will not work for the erev chatzeres, and he passed Reb Elazar ben Tadoi, who seemed to have said the same thing. So my time allow mishum dechat taimu. It would make sense to say that since he passed like these two people, their reason must be the same. Amar Abaye, it's exactly the opposite. The ichat taima, if they're both saying the same thing, tar tehilchas alamali. Why do I need Rav to say halacha Reb Elazar ben Tadoi and halacha Reb Meir if they say the same thing? Rav only had to say one of the two. Zok to Gemara hakama shmalon b'le'avdina and kutrei chumre be'eruvin. Rav wanted to teach us a chiddush that in Eruvin we need to be mekel, and if there's one Tana who holds of two chumras, you'll never paskin like both the chumras of one Tana. So therefore, if there's two chumras that you want to paskin like, in this case, Rav wanted to paskin like both chumras, he needs to find another Tana to blame one of the chumras on, so he could say, now this chumra I'm not crediting to Reb Meir. This chumra I'm giving to Reb Elazar ben Tadoi. The other chumra I'm going to give to Reb Meir. So let's look at the two chumras. We had two questions here. We had question A, can I use the shituf mevuyos to patter up the erev chatzeres when I did the shituf with wine, right? And that we said, Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai holds you cannot, and the Chacham of our Mishnah holds that you can. That's one machlokes. And Rameir wanted to say that you cannot use it. You cannot use wine to make shituf and also have it include the Eruv Chatzeres. That's one chomer. And then the second chomer is that Rameir held even if you use pas for the shituf and mavuyos, it won't work for the Eruv Chatzeres. So the patkin at such a big chomer, Rav couldn't do. So Rav had to do it in stages. First he said, Allah Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai, that if you made the shituf and mavuyos with wine, it wouldn't work for the Eruv Chatzeres. And then Rav Pasla Rameir, which makes it even more chomerdik, that even if you use pas for the shituf and mavuyos, you would still need a separate Eruv Chatzeres. So therefore, you have a Geshmak Araya. From the fact that Rav Pasla Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai and he Pasla Rameir, it shows that that's the Svar of Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai. It illustrates that the Svar of Rabbi Elazar ben Tadai was that since you used wine to make your shituf, therefore it will not patter up Eruv Chatzeres. And Rav illustrated by pasking like both that he would never pasking like one person alone who's machmor on two accounts, so he breaks it up. And it teaches us a kula. Rav's chumrah here teaches us a kula in Hilchos Eruv Chatzeres that you could never pasking like one person who has too many chumras. If you want to have a lot of chumras, you're going to have to find other reps to blame the chumras upon. Right, we really shop. Right, those things normally we shop around for kulas. Here, Rav was shopping around for chumras.
But then your colleagues will go like you, who have all chumras.
That's right.
That's where they're all based on.
No, that's only if you could find different people to be machmer. If you couldn't find, then in Echanami, even Rav would have to be Eichel.
Right, so if you find different people, great.
That's right.
And then your Talmud is not going to remember who you rely on. He's going to say, I just relied on the Rebellion there, whatever.
Okay. So he ends up just relying on Rav.
Exactly.
So to him, it's one chomer from two people. I hear. Very good. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter.
But you see also how it happens in two stages.
Yes.
Mama, like first they have to take the gold to say keep it.
Right. So yeah, exactly. It's like boiling a frog. If you want to boil a frog, you don't cook up water and put the frog in it. The frog will jump out. You put the frog into room temperature water, and every hour you raise it by 1 degree, and before the frog knows it, he's cooked. That's called cook. It's called cooking the frog. Okay, Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. My Reb Meir and my Rabbanon. There's this machlokes that we've been talking about between Reb Meir and the Rabbanon. If you can use the shituf mavuyos to also take care of the Eruv Chatzeres. So here's where the core of the machlokes is. The Tanya, ma'arvin b'chatzeres b'pas. Eruv Chatzeres has to be done with bread. V'moratu la'ar b'yayin. What if they wanted to use wine to make Eruv Chatzeres? Ein ma'arvin. It simply will not work. Mishtatvin b'mavi, shituf mavuyos could be done even with wine. V'moratu l'shtatev b'pas. But if they wanted to upgrade and use pas for shituf and mavuyos, mishtatvin they're allowed to, like Mechi highlighted earlier. Ma'aravin b'chatzeres u'mishtatvin b'mavi. You have to do both. Why do you have to do both? The loy lishkach teres erev natinoikos, so the children shouldn't forget about erev and chatzeres. Sheyoyim Rabbi Yisrael lo irvu divrei Reb Meir. So I think it's exactly how Mechi highlighted it before. But Chachamim no, oy ma'arvin, oy mishtatvin. You don't have to do both. If you want to be mater to carry in a chutzner, you could make erev chatzeres, but you can also make shituf mavuyos, and that'll also cover you for the erev chatzeres. And pligi ba Rab Nechumi v'Rabba the Bach adds in v'Rabba bar Yosy. There's a machlokes amiroim as to how to understand the scope of the machlokes between Reb Meir and the Chachamim. Chad Omar bepas. Now, before we go weiter, I just want to remind ourselves how we learned our sugya. We learned our sugya that the chumrah of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer ben Tadai, his chumrah was that if you use wine for shituf, then it wouldn't cover the Eruv Chatzeres. And Rabbi Meir upped the ante by saying even if you use pas. So that's only going to be consistent with one of the two ways that the Gemara now suggests to understand the machlokes Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. So Chad Omar, one mandamar holds, and this will not be consistent with the way we learned the sugya. Chad Omar bepas the kul amaloi pligi the bechad sogi. Even Reb Meir agrees that if you use pas for the shituf and mavuyos, it patters up there of chatzeres. Keep pligi b'yayin. Now, of course, that doesn't fit with us because we learned that Reb Meir was so machmer that even if you use past for shituf, you won't be able to use it for the Eruv Chetzeres. So our sugi is not learning this way, but the Chara Amar, but the other Amor learned the machlokes between Reb Meir and the Chachamim is b'yayin the chula amalei pligi diba tarti. Everybody between Reb Meir and the Chachamim hold that if you made an Eruv with wine, if you made the Shituf and Mavuyas with wine, it would not work for the Eruv Chetzeres, which would be the shita of how we're learning Rabbi Elazar ben Tadoi. Ki pligi, where the Reb Meir machmer is bepas, meaning that the Chachamim of Reb Meir hold if you use pas for the shituf, it would work for the Eruv Chetzeres, which is exactly what we're learning in Rabbi Elazar ben Tadoi. And Reb Meir holds even if you use pas for the shituf, you still have to make a separate Eruv Chetzeres. Meisvei freik the Gemara. The way we're learning now that everybody agrees that if the Eruv was made with wine, if the Shituf was made with wine, it won't work for Eruv Chetzeres. It doesn't quite fit geschmack into the nusach of how the Brisa just quoted the Chachamim, because basically the Chacham said Oy ma'arvin oy mishtatfen. They were very, very liberal. Oy ma'arvin oy mishtatfen. My love, what's Pashup Pshat in those words? Oy ma'arvin b'chotzer b'pas, oy mishtatfen b'mavui b'yayin. So it's clearly seeming to say that if you made shituf with the yayin, it would work. So according to the way we're learning that everybody agrees if you make shituf with yayin, it won't work. The Pashup, the reading of the Brisa doesn't seem to indicate that. It seems to indicate that if you used wine for shituf, it would work for Eruv Chetzeres. Amar Gidol Marav, no, don't learn it that way. Halikamer, oy ma'arvin b'chotzer b'pas, u'mutar kan v'kan, oy mishtat b'pas, u'mutar b'kan v'kan. Learn those words that the Chacham said that oy ma'arvin oy mishtatfin is only if pas was used. If pas was not used, and you used wine for shituf and mavuyos, then it wouldn't work for Eruv Chetzeres. Amar Gidol Marav, halacha Reb Meir. The halacha is like Reb Meir, meaning that you're allowed to darshan in public l'chumra that the halacha is like Reb Meir, that you need both. You need Eruv Chetzeres and you need shituf and mavuyos. Rav Huna Amar minik Reb Meir. The minik is like Reb Meir. And we learned that means you don't announce it barabim, but if someone comes to ask you what you should do, you'll pass it like Reb Meir. Rabbi Yochanan Amar nahagu am Reb Meir. You don't even pass it for someone, but if someone did like Reb Meir, you don't tell him to undo it. Now the problem is normally when someone's mekel, you have such a nusach. Right? There's a shayla. Do you announce this kula, or do you only pass them privately for people with the kula, or you don't even pass them privately for the people with the kula, but if they did it, you don't make them undo it? How does it work in the chumrah? So Tosfos has a couple of different options of where Reb Meir would come out of kula. If you have to make a bracha when you make an eruv, it's a shayla of a bracha levatola. So the shayla is: are you allowed to make two brachas, one on the shituf and one on the eruv? According to everybody who argues with Reb Meir, you can make two brachos because you're not even supposed to make Eruv Chetzeres once you make shituf. So the first one about paskin that you can tell people barabim make two brachos. The second it was don't tell people barabim. If someone asks you, you'll tell them make a shituf and make a bracha, and make an Eruv Chetzeres and make a bracha. And the third thing is really not supposed to make a bracha. But if somebody made two brachos, you don't have to scream at him. You can let him make two brachos. That was one option. The other option is if you didn't make the Eruv Chetzeres and you relied on the shituf, and today is the 8th day and the baby needs to have a bris, and you need to carry over the knife to the or other tools that you need for the tinner, do you make the bris or not? So we would paskin about if you don't pass like Reb Meir, then you would make the bris. According to Reb Meir, you can make the bris. So there also comes out a kula. My Rebbe once told me that there was someone making fun of a brisker, and he was telling the brisker that you're always machmer. How come you never make? How come punct your svara always seems to coincide with the machmer? How come your svara never seems to correspond with the kula that you? So what are you talking about? I'm very makel. I hold if you have a suffix, if you bench, you're out of bench again. Zok to Gemara weiter. Chamisha chaburis. If there were 5 chaburis.
They said the same thing for Bristol Road. The Beis HaLevi years ago. He said, I'm also a maker. I hold you out to learn on Tisha B'Av.
The Beis HaLevi once said, I'm a big maker. What do you have, machmer? I hold you allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. Shkoyach. Zok Eile Gemara weiter. Chamisha chaburis sheshavsu b'traklan echad. 5 chaburis that spent Shabbos in a very big mansion. Now, just because it was a very big mansion, it didn't mean that it has 500 rooms. It's one big open room, and they created makeshift barriers, Rashi tells us, to create privacy between the 5 chaburas. But they all were in one house. Now, this house, of course, was one of many homes that were in a chutzner, and they needed to make Erev Chatzeres to walk out into the Chaser. So B'Shamay Oimrim, Erev L'chol Chabur V'Chabur. Since we've partitioned off little areas within this big house, we look at it like it's a private house. And since it's a private house, every individual mini house there would have to contribute one part to the Erev. Just because there's partitions, they're all in one house together. We look at them like they're one. They only have to contribute one part to the Erev Chatzeres. However, Beisilo agreed that they're considered separate. If there are people that are in completely separate rooms or on a different floor, there they would need an Erev for every Chabur. Now this here becomes relevant if you're in a motel for Shabbos and other people are in the motel. So there are those who learn that if you eat in your hotel room, for sure you would need to make a separate Erev Chatzeres. But what if you're in a hotel and you eat together? Could be you don't need an Erev Chatzeres. So there's shilas about that. The person will say if the hotel owner is there, for sure that joins everybody together. So there's a lot of shilas about these types of things when you need Erev Chatzeres. So these are all shilas you'd have to ask a Rav. Yeah. Amar Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said, Machloikis b'Mesipis. The whole Machloikis between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, where Beis Hillel considers it to be one big home, that's only if there's a very flimsy makeshift type of barrier. But if there's a proper wall that's 10 tefachim high, that separates them. Divrei HaKoil, Erev l'chol chabura v'chabura, that's separate, and each family is considered like they're in a different home. And they would each have to contribute separately to the Erev. Ika da Amri, Amar Nachman, af b'mesibas machlokes. There's others nusach that learn that the machlokes is af b'mesibas, meaning Beis Hillel holds whether it's a flimsy wall or a sturdy wall, one Erev is enough. And Beis Shammai holds whether it's a flimsy wall or a sturdy wall, each one needs to have their own Erev. They're considered separate. So that's two shittas so far in the machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And now we're going to complicate it further by offering two more shittas, and we're going to have to figure out how these four shittas work together. Pligiba, we have a chart for whoever has article, we have a chart for it, but let's go to the next level of complication. Pligiba, Rab Chiya, Rab Shimon, Berebi. They also had a machlokes about where is the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Chad Omar, machlokes b'mechitzos hamagiyos l'tikra. The only time they argue that Beis Shammai would be machmer and say each family is considered in a separate home is only if the walls were floor to ceiling. And those who learn that people with 3 tefachim at the ceiling, but they have to be full height walls. Even though they're 10 tefachim high, divrei hakoil erev echad l'kulam. Everybody would agree that it's erev echad l'kulam. So right off the bat, you see that this doesn't stem with the first shita, because the first shita says that the machlokes is b'mesipis, but b'mechitza asara divrei kol erev. Here it says even a mechitza asara there's a machlokes. I'm sorry. Here it says fakert. The machlokes is only if the mechitzas go up to the top, but mechitzas don't go up to the top. Everybody holds erev echad l'kulam. Culture can buy mesipis. So you see clearly this doesn't fit in with the first shita, and it doesn't fit in with the second shita either, because the second shita holds the machlokes is by mechitzas. I'm sorry, the machlokes is side by mesipis and side by mechitzas. Here it says even by mechitzas there's no machlokes. The machlokes is only if it's magiyos l'tikra. So clearly this shita doesn't fit in with any of the earlier shitas that we learned. And then the Chad Omar and the other Mandamar said machlokes b'mechitza she'ein magiyos l'tikra. The machlokes is only by magiyos she'ein magiyos l'tikra. So this might fit in with some of the shittas of Rav Nachman. So Zaktamar Meisvei. Now what we could do is if you have the art scroll, if you don't have the art scroll, I'll go through the chart. The art scroll is a very nice chart to clarify it. So the art scroll says as follows: if there's 3 categories, right? There's partitions that reach the ceiling, there's sturdy partitions, and then there's flimsy partitions. So if you take Rav Nachman said that the machlokes was by flimsy partitions. If they were rigid partitions, everybody agrees it's separate. Kol shekain, if they reach the ceiling, they're going to be completely separate. The second sheet of Rav Nachman said that Beishamai and Basil are arguing by partitions whether they're flimsy or not flimsy. There's a machlokes Beishamai and Basil. But again, if they reach the ceiling, even in the second lashon of Reb Nachman, everybody would agree that it's considered separated, that each one needs their eruv. The first Gemara held that the machlokes is only if they reach the ceiling. But anything less than that, even if it's a sturdy mechitza and kol shekain, if it's a flimsy mechitza, for sure everybody agrees that to Basil that one eruv is enough. And the second Gemara said that the machlokes between Bisham and Basil is by a partition that's 10 tefachim high. If it goes up to the ceiling, everybody would agree that you need to bring a separate eruv. So that sort of breaks down the four shittas. You have to go through them in your head to get them clear. But here's where it gets a little complicated, because now we're asking a kasha on one of them. Meisvei. Omar Rabbi Yehuda, Hasaber. Rabbi Yehuda, the Saber, said. What does Saber mean? Rashi says Saber means Al Shem Churfei Kari Leachi. Since he was a very sharp, smart guy, they called him Saber. He had good svara. He had very good svaras. Okay, I apologize. So Chaim Shvi said, the Rabbi Grimam said that the Meirem are not guys, and what's not stuff? Gemara. The Gemara is not stuff, and the Meirem are not guys. So Rabbi Yehuda Savar was a very chashuv Talmud Chacham who was very sharp, and that's why he was called Hasaber. So what did Rabbi Yehuda Savar say? This machlokes between Beishamai and Basil, whether or not it's one eruv for everybody or multiple eruvin. Al mechitzos hamagis l'tikra. Shetzrichen eruv l'chol chabur v'chabur. Everybody agrees that if the mechitzos go up to the ceiling, they're completely severed. Al man nechlaku. Where are they arguing? Al mechitzos. They're arguing when you have sturdy mechitzos. She'ein magis l'tikra. Shebeishamai amrim eruv l'chol chabur v'chabur u'besil amrim eruv echad l'chul. So now the Gemara takes this member from the Tana and vets it against the four different shittas we had from Amiroyim to see who makes the grade, who stims with this, and who doesn't. Because if you don't stim with this, then you're out. Because a Tana's halacha is what's right. So let's start with shitta number one. If you hold that the machlokes is the mechitzos hamagiyos l'tikra, which was not the Rab Nachman's, it was the first shita of the second set of Amiroyim, that the machlokes Beishamai and Basil is only if walls all go up to the ceiling tiyufta. They're ogeshvang and ganzen, because Rabbi Yehuda Saber said very clearly that everybody agrees if it's magiyos l'tikra, you need a separate eruv. So that's simple. L'man damer b'mechitzos she'ein magiyos l'tikra machlokes, and according to the Man Damer, which is the second Amoyer, who said Beishamai and Basil argue when you have proper barriers that don't go up to the ceiling, siyata, that's perfect, because that's exactly what Rabbi Yehuda Saber says. Lahach lishnu damer Rab Nachman. According to the shita that we had earlier in the Gemara, which was an ikadami of Rab Nachman, who said machlokes permisipus, machlokes is only in a flimsy barrier, but if it was a solid wall, even if it didn't go up to the top, that's where there's a machlokes. I'm sorry, forget machlokes is a flimsy barrier, but when it's a sturdy wall, everybody agrees it's separate. Tiyufta, that doesn't shim, because Rabbi Yehuda specifically said, Al man nechlaku al mechitzos shem megis l'tikra. So clearly the machlokes is by mechitzos, and the first lashon of Nachman said that the machlokes is only by mesipus. And lahach lishon number of Nachman after mesipus machlokes. Now there's one shita who held in Rab Nachman that the machlokes in our Mishnah between Beishamai and Basil is both with a flimsy barrier and with a rigid barrier. Now Rabbi Yehuda Saber is speaking about a rigid barrier. He doesn't address a flimsy barrier. So what would Rabbi Yehuda Saber hold by a flimsy barrier? Would he hold that it's for sure not a barrier, and therefore he would agree with Basil, everyone would hold like Basil, and that would notch him with this? Because this Lashon of Nachman said that they argue both by Mesipis and by a barrier, or not. So Zokim we're limited with Yufta. Maybe this should upslog that Lashon of Nachman, and by Mesipis there wouldn't be a machlokes. Rab Nachman, no. According to Rab Nachman, there could be a machlokes Beishamai and Basil with a rigid wall that doesn't go up to the ceiling, or even a flimsy partition that doesn't go up to the ceiling. In both cases, Rabbi Yehuda Saber would agree that both Beishamai and Basil are arguing. So when Rabbi Yehuda Saber described the machlokes, why did he say al mechitza shed magis l'tikra? How come Rabbi Yehuda Saber didn't mention mesipis as well? To tell you the Chiddush of Basil, that even though you have real strong barriers, but since they don't go up to the top, Basil holds that there's still one big happy family, and they only have to contribute one Eruv. Why didn't Rabbi Saber highlight that they're arguing by Mesipus as well, by a flimsy barrier, and say even by a flimsy barrier, Beis Shammai holds they're separated? So if we want to highlight, we want to pick a case to show the machlokes Beis Shammai and Basil, and we want to highlight one of the two, we'll always try to highlight the kula, not the chumrah. So therefore, we'll say even with a rigid wall, Basil holds that doesn't create a separation, and you could still have one eruv for everybody. What time is Shabbos? 6:55 or 7? 7. Okay, so we have a minute left. Amar Nachman Amar Rav. Halacha Rabbi Yehuda Asaber. We pass on like Rabbi Yehuda Asaber, and the fact that if the barriers went up to the ceiling, everybody agrees it's separate, and the machlokes is with barriers that did not go up to the ceiling. Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak Masnisa Namideka. If you look at the lashon of our Mishnah, it actually fits in beautifully with Rabbi Yehuda Asaber. The Katani, it says, Umoidim, both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that it's considered separate rooms and each one needs their own eruv. When some people are living in Chadorim and Aliyas, they're considered completely separate. So Frank the Gemara, my Chadorim umay Aliyas. What does the Mishnah mean when the Mishnah is Chadorim and Aliyas? Yilema Chadorim mamish. Aliyas mamish, if it means they're completely separate rooms, well, then pshita. I don't need a Mishnah to speak that out. The machlokes is only by a flimsy wall in a big area. That's a big open area. But if it's separate rooms, of course they're separate dwellings. Ella, what the Mishnah must refer to is elalav ke'ein chadorim ke'ein aliyas. If the walls were similar to chadorim and similar to aliyas, and what does that mean? Umayniu mechitas hamagiyas latikra. So that's goof of what the Mishnah means when the Mishnah says chadorim and aliyas means if you built walls that were all the way up to the ceiling, like Rabbi Elazar Saber said, it's considered severed. Sai according to Beis Shammai, Sai according to Beis Hillel, and everybody would need to bring their own eruv. Shema mina. Should we push? Should we push to the Mishnah, or should we stop here? We can push. We can do this in 2 minutes. Tana, we learned. When do we say that even Beis Shammai holds that you have to send a separate eruv from every single cubicle to the eruv chetzeres? Is keshemaylichin is Eruvin l'makam acher. That's if they're sending their eruv to a makam acher. Avalim haya Eruvin ba'etzlan. But if the eruv was being placed by them, divrei hakoil eruv echad l'kulan, everybody would agree that one eruv would be enough. So Rashi tells us right off the bat that this brisa could not learn like we were learning until now, because if we're talking about each cubicle really being a separate room and like a separate house, you couldn't say eruv echad l'kulan. You would have to need a separate eruv for everybody. So what the Gemara is telling us here is that, in fact, really Beis Shammai also holds that even though there's walls there, everything is considered one. And this shaila between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel has nothing to do with what we've discussed until now. Is it a separate room or not? It clearly is a separate room. It's merely a shaila in Hilchos Eruvin. Now we know there's a halacha if 5 people in the chutzner joined together, and then they wanted to join another chutzner that was neighboring. They wanted to make a eruv with another chutzner, their neighboring chutzner. So the halacha is, Reuven himself, one person in the chutzner, can go put something in the next chutzner, and he represents everybody. There's actually machlokes about it, if he represents anybody or not. So what Beis Shammai is saying here is avada. It doesn't matter anymore. We're not discussing anymore what's going on in this chutzner. But when it's a question of making an eruv elsewhere, Zok Beis Shammai, if you're making the eruv elsewhere, every single party has to be part of that eruv. You don't consider them joined together. However, if the eruv was coming to them, then one is enough. Divrei kol eruv echad l'kul. So to Gemara, Kaman Oslo, based on that, Kaman Oslo Hodatanya, Chamisha Shagovos Eruvin. If 5 people joined in an eruv in the chutzner, and then they wanted to join in the neighboring chutzner, Kishamelichan is Eruvin l'makam acher, eruv echad l'chulam, one eruv is enough for everybody. Come on, who would that go like? It would be like Beis Hillel, because Beis Shammai just told us that when they're sending the eruv out, everybody has to have a separate eruv. Only if the eruv is placed in their house, only then they don't have to have a separate eruv for each person. B'ikadamri, there's another nusach to how this was said. There's a machlokes b'sham and b'sil. If you need multiple Eruvin, even if the Eruv was brought to them, B'Shamai holds that everybody has to contribute to that Eruv, even if it's in the big mansion that they're all sharing. But if they're sending their Eruv out to the next Chatzar, everybody holds you need a separate Eruv for each Chabur. So based on that, if there's a brisa that says that even when they're sending their Eruv to another place, one Eruv for everybody is enough, you don't need multiple Eruvin, that would not fit in, not like Beishamai and not like Beisil, because everybody, according to this nusach, agrees that when they're sending their Eruv out to a different area, you need a separate contribution from every single member of the Chatzar to be sent to the next Chatzar. I guess we can stop here. So we're almost caught up because today's daf was Ayin Beis.